Merry Christmas! Welcome to another episode of Foresight TV. Jack is the most famous senior living resident in the entire industry. He is really showing me up with his Christmas background. I've got my usual ordinary one. So before we get started in our conversation, our intro, I want to say this. Thank you so much for watching Foresight TV. I am so glad you're joining us for this particular broadcast. As I'm sure you know, we are committed to improving the lives of people who live and work in senior living. So we would love to hear from you about what you're doing to improve the lives of both residents, team members, and families. And it's super helpful if you come back to us and say, hey, here's some things that would be really good to talk about. Or maybe you have a story we should be telling. And so I'd love to have you on as a guest. So in addition to the thought leadership content we do with Senior Living Foresight, with Foresight TV, we've got LinkedIn posts, we've got the Foresight podcast, Tech Tuesday. The most important thing that we actually do is the Foresight website, where we publish new content every day, 5 days a week. It's content you won't find anyplace else. It's where we can really go depth. And when we write about things, Jack's a big part of contributing articles to that. It's free. It's easy to subscribe to. You can see the QR code on the screen, or there's a link in chat. So all you have to do is put your email in, and I don't know, maybe your name or something, and you will be signed up, no cost. Last thing I want to say is I just appreciate your passion for the industry and everything you do to improve the lives of residents and team members and families. So thank you for watching, and with that, we'll get started. Hey guys, Steve Moran here. Jack, welcome. I'm so glad to have you here. I'm so glad that you put so much time and effort into what we're doing at Foresight. You contribute amazing articles. We first met at, what was it, a California? I can't remember where we met, some conference. And we started talking, and you are the voice for the industry more than anybody else of the residents. So let's actually start. I'd like to have you talk a little bit about your story, where you live, and just tell us about you.
Well, first, Merry Christmas to everybody and Happy Hanukkah. They come together this year, and I'm not sure whether Kwanzaa coincides as well, but everything comes together. So we're delighted that you all are here, and we hope you have every blessing of the season that you can. Speaking of myself, I was educated as an historian. I became an actuary by vocation, and more recently, I'm an old person, and so I bring an old person's perspective. But throughout that entire journey, my passion has been for all the positive things that well-run businesses can bring to humanity. And there's never been an engine for social betterment that is equal to what business is able to do. And that is no more so true than it is in senior living. So we appreciate all of you and everything that you do every day to make this industry better for those people who live under your care.
So I want to actually dig a little deeper into this idea of businesses improving lives. I honestly, as long as I've known you, I don't know we've actually really had this conversation that explicitly. And I think it's actually a fascinating topic more broadly, and then bring it back to senior living. But let's talk. I want to actually dig a little deeper into sort of your story. You're living in a CCRC life plan community. How did you make the decision to move into senior living? And you've been there for a while, right?
Well, we have. We had close friends. I was close friends with the fella, but we were a couple friends as well. And they decided to start looking at senior living. I think it began with a property in Thousand Oaks, University Village, Thousand Oaks, and we went up to look at that. And it was 106 degrees, so that wasn't going to work out. But from that, that's what sort of motivated us to start looking for ourselves. Now, we were familiar with the senior living model because my wife's parents lived at Rivermead in Peterborough, New Hampshire, which you may all know from the Thornton Wilder play Our Town. Our Town was Peterborough, New Hampshire, and they had a wonderful Rivermead is a delightful CCRC, and we saw that lifestyle. But we live in California. We didn't want to be in Thousand Oaks at 106 degrees, so we wound up. I'll spare you the long journey on the coastline in Carlsbad, and we've been living here for the past 18 years.
And so the motivation to move into senior living rather than stay at your own home or I don't know, maybe an active 55 like a Sun City or something like that was what?
Well, we were attracted by the social benefits that seemed manifest, and we didn't really think about it. I wasn't versed in the industry. I assumed that it was regulated like the insurance industry that I was familiar with, and so there were a number of things that we just assumed, and so we didn't think about it that much. When we found something that appealed to us, we made the move. Perhaps we should have given it more thought, but the idea that is so prevalent today, we're not ready for that yet, was not a big factor then 18 years ago. And so, we were just looking to simplify our lives and moving into a place where you get your meals and your maintenance and everything is bundled. That was an appealing prospect.
Well, and I know it's interesting, as you know, and I've talked about it before. I'm going to turn 70 in, I guess, less than 2 months now. And I've always, when I started into senior living when I was young, I would sort of jokingly say I always wanted to make enough money in senior living. This is why I was doing operations that I never have to go live in one. And I sort of quietly, I have sort of felt, in much of the last 10 years that I don't know that I really want to go live in senior living. But I would tell you over the last couple of years, I've been in a handful of communities where I'm seeing people who are living really vibrant, really social lives. They're continuing to give back. And I think I see senior living communities where I look at that and I go, man, I think I could live here and I'd be really, really happy with things. And of course, as you know, Jack, and again, a lot of people who are particularly reading the website know, I'm managing a senior living experience for my stepfather that's not been terrific. And so it can go both ways. Before we sort of get into the resident experience, because you brought it up early, I actually want to go back to this idea that business can make lives better. I think it's a really fascinating concept. And I think particularly in light of what happened with the United Healthcare CEO and sort of the resulting social media, primarily firestorm of people who were, it's horrifying to me, but who are saying, yeah, he deserved it. I hate corporations are terrible. There's sort of almost this gut wrench, a gut response from many people in society that business and corporations are all bad. And you're sort of suggesting that at least that's not necessarily true.
Well, I don't think it ought to be true, but I mentioned that I was educated as an historian, so I tend to try to figure these things out. And it turns out that in 1970, Milton Friedman, who was a very prominent economist at the University of Chicago School, wrote an article, a very influential article in the New York Times, in which he argued that the sole social responsibility of business was to maximize profit and shareholder value. And of course, if you were a corporate executive and somebody says, well, the sole value is to make money and advance yourself, wow, that's licensed to let her rip. Now, there has been some pushback to that. In 1994, John Elkington came up with the triple bottom line idea of people, purpose, profit. I forget what the three P's were, but environment, I guess, was in the middle of there. But that's not the purpose of business either. The purpose of business isn't to have collective social responsibility for the welfare of the world. It's to build value, to provide value to customers. Profit is a necessary part of that. And if you do an excellent job of providing that value, the profit can be substantial because the benefit is substantial. But we've sort of turned that on its ear, and then that has provoked a political back pressure where people say, well, you can't trust business, but you can trust government. And that puzzles me because government is a monopoly. Once you turn everything over to a government program, there is no reason, I don't know, I think that the ability of business to innovate, if we didn't have that business system available, we wouldn't have Amazon. We wouldn't have the benefit that we have today by quick package delivery, lower prices. We've reduced distribution costs. There are just so many benefits that flow from well-run businesses that it's exciting to be involved with that. And that was something that I learned early on, particularly while I was in college. I saw businesses who were doing exciting things that you just don't find anywhere else.
Well, and I really like this, Jack. I mean, when you think about it, what we're doing right now, we're having this conversation where I don't know exactly what your computer setup is, but I've got a laptop and a big screen here and a camera up here, and I'm actually running a little GoPro over here for some B-roll that I'm putting together. And we're all plugged into the internet, and there's microphones and all this stuff, and none of that would happen without big business, without big business. They're not things that could have been done by small business, right? And the cars we drive and the airplanes we ride in and all that stuff.
Well, I think for a long time, business was improving the standard of living because as businesses became more effective, that was shared widely. Partly as a result of this, Milton Friedman, business is all about self-interest. I guess it's a latter-day Adam Smith idea that greed is good or something. A disproportionate amount of the wealth is going to the guys at the top, and most of them are not the innovator. It's one thing if you're Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk and you're out there, taking risk and getting your hands dirty, really making the world better. But if you just float to the top by being promoted up the ranks because you're a nice guy, and all you do is administer the firm instead of innovating and managing the firm, why on earth are you entitled to salaries or incomes, compensation packages that are like more than the wealth that almost the wealthiest people accumulate in a lifetime, and you get it in 1 year? I just don't understand why somebody, a cable TV provider, is paid $86 million for 1 year's service. That makes no sense to me whatsoever.
Yeah, it's and what's interesting to me about it, and then we'll move on back to senior living, is that it's not even it's even contrary to the idea of maximizing. It's actually completely contrary to the idea of maximizing shareholder value. It's really robbing the shareholders of money that should be theirs rather than the top executive. So absolutely.
Well, I don't think that's quite the way they see it, but they do say, gee, we've got this money machine. I'd like my share. and the other guys are doing it.
Yeah.
So there is an IRS code provision 46. I think it's 4658 that says if you're in the not-profit world, you have to limit your compensation. But then they got around that by saying that your compensation is reasonable if you run salary surveys and you're lower than what other people. Because the idea is that unless somebody gets paid at least $5 million a year, you won't be able to retain them. That they might go off and want to be the coach in North Carolina.
Yep, that's right. So let's come back to senior living. As you've been living in senior living, I know that you have more than anything else represented the voice of the resident, and that one of your, I know, complaints, frustrations, observations is that the residents' needs don't seem to be often very high in the hierarchy of the leadership of corporations. And I would add, again, I'm working off of primarily one data point, and you're talking to a lot of people, so yours in some sense is bigger than mine, but as a caregiver, as a family caregiver for somebody who's in senior living, the other observation that has really shocked me is that as a family member who's really the deciding party for everything, they don't spend very much time talking about what my needs are either. I don't think anybody has ever come to me and said, "Hey, Steve, how are we doing? What could we do to make this experience better for you?" And it seems to me that's so basic and obvious.
Well, I'll just say that where I live, we're very blessed to have an executive director who does exactly what you just said and does try to make things right. So, and that position is the most critical position in senior living. I'm always shocked at these big central office operations that have nothing to do with residents and bring in a huge amount of overhead when the key position is the one on the ground in the community. The executive director, they determine whether the community succeeds or fails. But to give you an example of what you were just talking about, Matrix Care has a new dining management module. And this morning, they sent out, some of the people listening to this call may have gotten their survey. And I went in to look at their survey, and I was going to respond to their survey. And they've got maybe 5 categories of, they say, what's your responsibility in the organization? And missing is the customer. I know of no industry that has ever been able to thrive while not hugging its customer, loving its customer, and wanting to know what the customer thinks. I think that's a tremendous problem. And we could talk more about that, but I'll go back to you.
Yeah. So I think that listening, I think that what we see in business, and this is not far from just a senior living organization challenge. It's a business challenge that businesses have. Every business really has at least 2 customers, right? The first customer is the obvious customer. In the case of senior living, it's the residents. But as important in virtually every business, the other customer that doesn't get thought of as a customer and should is the team members. So I'm fascinated, in particular, I'm fascinated by what's happening with NVIDIA. As you know, their stock has gone up, I don't know, 2,000% in the last 5 years, something like that. So I've got a family member who was very fortunate to buy really not that many shares about 5 or 6 years ago. And the amount of increase in his wealth is astonishing. But I'm reading a book about the NVIDIA way, and one of the things that their CEO does is he invites people to send in what they call these T5T emails. And these are 5 things that you're thinking about right now. And they tend to be short bullet points. And there are 30,000 people who work for NVIDIA. Anybody can send those to the CEO anytime they want. He reads them all. He'll sit up on Friday night or Saturday night and just plow through these things. And he's using it to listen to weak signals. And as I'm looking at my experience as a consumer, I see so many areas of opportunity to make that better. Things that wouldn't cost more money. They just a different way of thinking about it, doing it. And I believe there are people who are working in that community who are looking at that and saying, "Man, here are things that if I could only tell somebody." But I sat down and made a chart, and I think I figured out that from, say, a food server or a caregiver to get to the CEO, to get to the CEO, they'd have to go through, I think, 6 or 7 layers of hierarchy. And from a CEO's standpoint, that's really scary, because you know that every step along the way, people are going to be protecting their jobs and trying to make sure they don't look bad. So I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think that's a big problem, and I think the better companies are moving away from the military hierarchical structure for that very reason. A startup isn't a hierarchy, so there's usually a mover, and that person comes in with an authority, but their authority is rooted in their creativity and their command of the purpose of the industry. They're not administering a big hierarchy, and they may be in trouble with the HR department. But I always liked the idea that Bob Townsend said, that the first thing you should do on becoming a CEO is to diminish the role of the HR department. So that's good. Now, you mentioned NVIDIA. Now, NVIDIA is creating wealth, and so the value is there, and the value comes over to the company. They're not so much looking for big margins, but Jensen Huang just announced a 70-pound integrated chip. You imagine 70 pounds, a big thing, but it replaces an entire data center. So if you can replace an entire data center with a chip, you've just saved a tremendous amount of money. You probably improved the quality of the experience. You've reduced the power drain and the ecological impact, and you've done a lot of good for the world. I know of no government agency that does that. In fact, the most telling thing that government agencies do is often very secret, like these drones that are flying over New Jersey, and nobody knows what they are, but nobody's worried. So I suspect that we all know where they came from, but it's top secret. So you don't have that dynamic in business. There's a chance to disrupt senior living. I think somebody's going to come along and do it, and the industry will be better for the disruption.
Okay, so I've got my, do I have it? Here we go. I got it. I'm gonna put on my magic wizard hat. I usually use this when I do a keynote, but it just happens to be there, so I'm gonna put this on. I don't have my magic wand. I do have one someplace that I use when I'm talking. It's a little small, isn't it? Anyway, I'm going to use my magic wand, and I'm going to make you king of a brand new senior living company. Howard, tell me about this new senior living company, how you're going to design it to maximize the customer, the resident experience.
Well, I think I'll begin by trying to open the market rather than shrink the market. So I might start by getting rid of the age requirement. I'd make it target elderly customers, but I see no value in having some kind of arbitrary minimum age. A lot of people don't even know what it is, and so why would you shrink your market if you don't have to? And then I'd go beyond that to be sure you have the value. At one time, the industry predominantly offered what's now called a Type A contract, a care inclusive contract, And that really helped with the financial challenges of facing people as they age. But the industry has moved away from that because providers say they're not comfortable with risk. So they transfer that risk onto the resident. So then the resident says, well, if I have to carry that risk anyway, why should I accept that contract? Maybe I'm better off on the outside. But also, during the 18 years I've lived here, there's been an awful lot of advance that makes senior living less critical. For example, when we moved in, one of the big things was my wife was looking forward to the time when she would no longer drive. She never enjoyed driving very much, and they offered transportation services on the campus. Since then, we have the gig economy, we have Uber and Lyft, and that's much less essential now than it was then. So if you just step back and look at the whole thing in perspective and say, how could we really do this better? Then I think you can come up with dramatic changes that would shift this whole industry away from an aging buildings and resistance to technology to a state of the art enterprise that attracts people, modern people who are looking for those things and who now come in and say, gee, this isn't what I expected. I think I'll change and stay away.
So I guess I'm particularly interested in, and this is an area I've written a lot about, I've thought a lot about, I've been forced to think about a lot more as I'm in and out my stepfather's community virtually every day, and that's to sort of the life enrichment programming that happens in senior living. And there are two things that just jump out at me. The first is that there are always a group of people who are living in any senior living community who are naturally gregarious. And they gather and they go to these events, and almost doesn't matter what those events are. And I could probably walk into my stepfather's community, even though I've done only a couple of events with him the first day when he moved from memory care to assisted living. There are people I see just, in passing every day that are they're very social people. And there are about 15, maybe 20 of these people that I see at every event. But I worry a lot about the rest of them. So my stepfather is very reluctant to go, and I know they're inviting him to things and he always says no. And I kind of think they should be pushing him. But I think sort of more broadly, even in an independent living where you are, Jack, how do you meet those needs of the people who are not sort of those extroverts? Let me give you both parts of this. And then the other thing I struggle with is when I actually look at the activities that are taking place. So yesterday I was there, I had a meeting with him, and in the sort of the activity room, they were playing, they had a bunch of balloons they'd blown up, and the residents were in there, probably 10 or 12 of them, and they were batting them around with pool noodles. And if people love that, that's fine. I think people need to find their own needs, but I'm thinking those are the games I play with my church, 5th and 6th grade church kids. I'm not sure I look at that and I think, is that really going to be my life when I'm 85 or 90 years old? And I kind of hope not.
Well, that's sort of funny. Funny you mentioned that because the other day I was on a treadmill because you have to do a minimum amount of exercise every day or you sort of atrophy. So I do the minimum. But anyway, I'm on a treadmill, running like a hamster, and across the way there was a group with big balls and drumsticks, and they're drumming on them, and there's the paid person in front who's all enthusiastic about this wonderful drumming exercise, and the marketing people came by with a tour and were saying, oh, here are happy residents drumming away. And I thought, boy, I'm glad I wasn't on that tour. So I guess that appeals to people because they certainly do. And most of the residents I know basically don't want to rock the boat. They're happy with whatever it is. You can do whatever you want with them. They know that their role is to be complacent and compliant, and they're willing to just withdraw into their hole as they get older. But one of the big challenges is that we don't adapt these communities to the challenges of aging. Very few of them really have programs for people who have hearing problems. We have a big Christmas party today. I don't think I'll go to it because it just becomes a welter of noise to me and I can't enjoy it. Now, at one time I would have had a lot of fun with it and that would have been a delightful thing. But as I've gotten older, my hearing is impaired, that becomes different. And you have people who have vision problems and balance problems and they can't walk very fast. There are all sorts of little challenges, and the emphasis is on the people who just moved in. And so we lose track of that mission to really make life meaningful throughout, all the way to the end of life. There are people who have written books that changed the world when they were over age 100. Remember the Delaney sisters just a couple of years ago. Why don't we empower those people? Why do we focus on saying, well, these are all hapless old people. Let's keep them amused and give them things that are appropriate for old people to do.
Yeah, I think that this is, I just think, and I honestly, if I've got activities leaders who are watching this, I'm going to apologize because I'm going to probably be a little bit insulting. But I guess one of the struggles I have, Jack, is that in my view, the life enrichment person should probably be the highest paid, highest educated person in a community. That they are charged with creating amazing life experiences for people who were, in general, successful enough to make enough money to be able to afford to stay in these very expensive communities. And instead, if they are considered part of the leadership team at all, they're the least influential, the least educated, and the least respected. And it just does not make any sense to me. I think the opportunity, if we hired people with master's degrees in gerontology and rec therapy to run these programs, it makes my head spin about how great they are and how much we'd be talking about how terrific it is.
Well, I think the Kendall Corporation, which is one of the more respected senior living organizations generally, I think, but they don't have professional life enrichment. They let the residents do that. So one of the things that shrinks the market is that the residents are not allowed generally to work in the community. So if you're an employee of a community, you can't move in because you'll lose your job, and that seems a little strange to me. The whole tipping thing. I've belonged to private clubs over the years. I'm an age when private clubs were more common than they are today. And there was always a gratuity added on to every check to make sure that the compensation of the staff was competitive with outside incomes. And then we wonder why people come to work and don't just bring their bodies, but not their minds, because they're not engaged and they're undermotivated. So there's so much that somebody who would just take hold of the industry and reinvent the model could do, that it's an exciting opportunity. My guess is that somebody will do it. It may be one of the existing players. I can think of some that could do it, or it might be an outsider. We'll find out what happens.
Yeah, and I want to say there are some bright spots. There's some people who are doing some really amazing things, who are creating great life experiences, and there's so much opportunity for these regional chains, these national chains, to just think about it and wake up every day saying, what would a great customer experience look like? And it should look like it, and we should think of it in terms of, because it makes people's lives better. But imagine, I've actually got a Instagram video reel queued up that I found and lost before I watched it, that I wanted to record and write about. And I just found it before we came on the air, so I've got to go back and look at it. But it was talking about the restaurant industry and talking about how if you get your team member, the question was sort of, let's suppose that during the holidays, you could max out your restaurant and fill every seat. And would your staff be able to handle it in a way where everybody would have an amazing experience, so that you would not just make a one-time sale, but that each one of those people would go out and be a raving fan and talk about how great it was? That's our opportunity, I think, when we do things like you're talking about.
Well, that is a challenge in the restaurant industry for sure. And more restaurants fail right after opening than you can shake a stick at. But I did stumble across a community that's called Redwoods in, I forget where it is. Oh, Mill Valley, run by a guy named J. Hunter Moore, who was doing an outstanding thing. And one of the things that I really liked was that their self-identification was, it's a community of seniors. It's not a retirement community. It's a community of seniors. It's not a life plan community. It's a community of seniors. That was magnificent. And just a little mindset change can make all the difference in seeing this industry thrive into the 21st century, or will it be replaced the same way that the models that predated it have been superseded?
Jack, we are past out of time. I knew this was going to happen. Great conversation. Jada, thank you for running things behind the scenes. And with that, we will be back next week with some new great shows.